Hello wonderful people, in today's video we'll be exploring the new features that are coming to Elementor 3.31. This is the first beta release, so there will be some changes before the final update. I would like to hear your thoughts on some of the points I will make somewhere within the video. If you're interested, stick around and we'll get right to it. The first feature we'll be taking a look at is the variables for color and font. So here we have a simple layout that I created using mostly version 4 elements, and I've created two sections for cards. The first section is using atomic elements from version 4, and then the second section is using the icon box widget from version 3. So the idea we're going to look at now is changing the colors using the variables. So now let's take a look. So I'll go ahead and edit the page. So for the version 3 cards, I'm using icon boxes. Let me show you the structure by pressing Ctrl+I on a Windows or Command+I on Mac to open up the structure panel. So we have icon boxes for the version 3 cards. Now let's say I want to change the color of the heading within the card. I'd have had to go to the Style tab, then to Content, and for the title color, I'd have had to create my color variable if I had not done that already. So I'll click on the color picker, then put in my variable color. Then to make it a variable I can reuse, I'll click on the plus icon, then give it a name, something like test, create. So now we have the color test. Then I can now apply it to other elements. So either by going to the card, going to the Style tab again, then Content, then this time I'll now choose the global color and choose my color. Or I can right-click, copy the entire element, go to the next card, and then say Paste Style. And that's how I'll have had to do for all of my cards. If I want to change the color, then it's a problem. I would have had to go to my site settings, then to global colors, and then change my color there. That's the only way to change the color. So you have to go to a different place just to change your colors. But now with the version 4 elements, let's see how much better it becomes and how more maintainable it is. So let's close the site settings. I'll head over to my version 4 card, and one thing you will notice is that version 4 is using atomic elements, meaning that to create your icon box or your card, you have to add all of the elements yourself. It's not just a single element that has everything contained. So I had to add the SVG element, then the heading element, and the paragraph within my container. So I had 4 elements, whereas with the icon box, it is 1 element. However, in the HTML, they are kind of similar. So don't be fooled by having 1 element versus 4 elements. In the HTML, it's still something similar. But now you have the added advantage that you can style every individual item separately rather than having one composed item and then it becomes difficult to style them together. So now, see the difference? If I go to my element, all I have to do is I'll create a class name, which I've done already. I created a class name called the hm-feature _heading, and I applied that to all of my different atomic elements. Then just make sure the class is highlighted. I'll go over to my typography and then text color. Once you hover over the input, you get an icon at the top for variables. When I click on it, I can either use a variable that I've already created and see how easy it is. Once I click on it, it applies that to everywhere the class was applied, and that is so easy. Rather than having to copy and paste style everywhere, just apply it once and it's applied everywhere. Let me click on the input again. If you want to create a new variable, you just click on the plus icon at the top of the popover. Then you give it a name. You can say maybe DJ test, and I'll just give it a random color, maybe FF0000, and then I'll create, and we get our color. If we go to the front end, so let me publish it and preview on the front end. You see, we get our color. Now, see one difference between the two of them. If I right click and inspect the version 3 card, and I look for my color, you see the variable name is e-global-color-some random string. Whereas with the version 4 element, if I inspect it, we get the same name that I used in the editor is what I see on the front end. So that is _DJ-test, and that's my color. To change it is also very simple. So just go back to the page. If I want to change the variable, I click on the input. Then if I hover over the variable, there's a pencil icon. When I click on that, I can now go ahead and change either the name or the value. So let's say I want to change it to something like a blue color. So let me delete the current value, and all I have to do is put in my new value. So I can say something like 0000FF, save, and that applies the global color everywhere. So you see, I didn't have to go to my site settings to change the color. I just changed it directly from any element that it was applied to. So I can publish that and preview on the front end again, and I get my new colors. The other variable that was added is for the font. At the moment, it only applies to the font family. So if you hover over the font family, you see we have the variable icon as well. I can click on that icon, and I can set up a variable for my font family. So I click on the plus icon, and then I can give it a name like Arial, and the value, I just select whatever font I have, maybe a custom font, a Google font or something. And then rather than having to apply that font family every time, I can just apply the variable, knowing that I can always change the variable at a later date, and it changes the font family everywhere. In future versions, they will apply that to other elements like the font size and so on. But for now, it's only the font family. One advantage of having the variable name reflecting what our user input was is that we can now apply the version 4 variables and classes to our version 3 elements and have the styles transferred to those elements. I'll also show you one limitation right now with version 4 elements and how we can now combine the version 3 elements with the version 4 styling to get our results. Hopefully in the future, there will be an update to fix the bug that I noticed, or maybe it's not a bug. Let me know in the comments what you think, if it's a bug or not. Let's take a look. Right now, you'll notice that the H1 element within my hero section is using the version 3 heading instead of version 4. The reason for that is that I have Adventures of Delicacies as the text, and I want to style just one of the words to be a different color. So what I've done is I've just given it a span with a class, and that changes the color of that word. Unfortunately, with the version 4 elements, they are heavily sanitized, so you can't really add a span tag into the heading. Let me show you what I mean. So let me click on the plus icon, and I'll add a heading widget, which is from the atomic heading. And I'll put the same style that I put in the first heading into the second heading. And you see that on the back end, the color was applied. If I publish it and preview on the front end, you'll notice that the version 3 heading had the color applied, but the version 4 heading had no color applied, even though I added a span tag with my class name that is having the color. If I inspect it using the dev tools, you'll notice that we have the H2 with Adventures of Delicacies. My entire span tag was stripped out. So right now, you can't actually style any individual word or character within the heading, because there's no way you can do that. There's nothing available, because Elementor, they are saying this is atomic elements, meaning that each element is an individual component, so it cannot have any inner span tag or any kind of attributes attached directly to it. So that is some limitation. So the workaround I found for now is that I basically took a regular heading widget, I put a style tab, gave it a class name, something like maybe DJ secondary. Then let me just copy that class name. So I create my class, and then I apply my typography style for the color, which was a variable. Let's just give it the blue color that we created. So now we have our color. I've created a class name. So what I now did was I now used a version 3 heading widget. So let's go ahead and add maybe a text editor widget and open the text file, and I'll put my span class equal to, paste my class name there, close the span, and I'll close the span tag, publish, then go ahead and preview on the front end. It's not showing at the moment. This was a small limitation I found recently, that there's a lot of like heavy browser caching. I'm not sure why, if it's my browser or something else, but let me go ahead and open it in a private window and we'll preview the page, and you can see it was added successfully. So the color is added successfully, but I'm not sure what happens, that there's a lot of browser caching that doesn't allow my changes to show on the front end. So we'll be using the private window to check our changes. So that's for the colors. And you can see how we can apply version 4 styles to version 3 elements. The next feature we have are improvements to the class manager. Now we can detect exactly where the classes were used. So if it's a different page or anywhere, you can detect where it was used. Let's see an example. So here we are back on our page. We have this heading element that has a class name. If we go to the class manager, if you hover over any class, you see an icon that now tells you exactly where the class was used. In this case, it says this class isn't used yet because I created the class, but I never used it. I deleted the point where I used the class. So now it's telling me that it was not used anywhere. If you go over any other class, you can see exactly where it was used. If I click on it, it takes you to the exact page where the class was used and how many times it was used on that page. In this case, it is only on the home page and we have 1. So it was once. So let's say we want to check for our button. I can quickly search. So let's search for BTN. And we have the home hero button, which are these 2 buttons. If I click to show the location, it tells me home page and there were 2 elements. So that's how you can quickly go to exactly where the class was used, and you can safely delete classes that have not yet been used. The next feature we have are filters and backdrop filters. So here we have a simple atomic image. If I go over to the Style tab and then Effects, you now see some new options for filters and backdrop filters. For the filters, you have these simple filters like your blur. If you want it to be a bit blurry, I can increase the blur. You can see the image becomes very blurry depending on how many pixels of blur you add. I can change it to maybe brightness and reduce the brightness to about 40%. Let's say you're trying to do a background image and you want the text at the foreground to be visible. You can apply some blur filter and then apply some brightness reduction so that the text at the foreground becomes very visible. So these are some tricks you can use. And basically, all you have to do is just keep applying the plus icon to add more. So you can layer them one on top of the other. It's not only one fixed value, you can have multiple filters. So they're all CSS filters. You can learn more about CSS filters from the MDN docs. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And basically that's it. So I can apply some blur. Then I've applied some brightness reduction. Then you can apply some other features, like maybe you want to have a sepia tone as well. And maybe let's say I want it to be 100%. And then it makes it 100% sepia tone and so on. So that is how you can apply multiple filters to your images and your other elements, just to make it easier for people to read text on background, or to just apply some nice stylish designs. The next effect is backdrop filter. And what that effectively does is that it blurs whatever is behind an element to give that glossy look. Here we have a background applied to our wrapper container for our individual cards. So now let's go to the card itself. I want to say that whatever is behind the card should become glossy or blurry. So we'll go to the card, and then head over to effects. So that's the effects and backdrop filter. So if I click on the plus icon, the backdrop filter is basically going to apply some blur. Now let's say I want to apply a 2-pixel blur, or keep blurring it out. You can see it is the background of our card that gets blurry, but the card itself remains visible. That's just a way to have those glossy effects when you're using your nav bar. Most people use it for their nav bar. So when they are scrolling down with the nav and the nav is sticky, whenever it goes over any kind of image, those images become blurry, whereas the actual nav bar remains visible. So that is a nice effect. Let me know in the comments, will you use this effect, and what use cases do you have for backdrop filter? The next set of features we'll be checking out are related to accessibility. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, because whatever you say might shape the future of Elementor. We want Elementor to get it right from the start. So let's take a look at the first one. The first one is that now by default, the header and footer in your Elementor theme builder get assigned the right HTML tag. So let me go ahead and create a new header. So the header template. And if you go over to the cog icon in the top center of your page, you'll see that the HTML tag for the header has now been set to header. Same with the footer. So the header and the footer are now set correctly. I don't know if you watched our session we did with the WP accessibility meetup, where Angela and I were talking about these landmark regions within Elementor. If you haven't watched it, I will leave a link to it in the description. But basically, some of the recommendations we did there have now been fixed by Elementor in their latest updates. So, yay! The next feature that was added, which is very good for accessibility, is attributes. Although it's only in the Pro version. But now we can add our data attributes for styling purposes. We can add your ARIA attributes for accessibility purposes. You can add other attributes for maybe your analytics and other things like that. So now you have access to adding attributes. And we'll see an example now. There was a slight bug in the version 1 of the beta release, but I think in the version 2, it should be fixed. Let's take a look at an example. So back to our cards example. Now let's say we have our icon and we don't want that icon to be read to screen readers. So we want to add an ARIA hidden equal to true to the icon. What we can now do easily is click on our icon, then in the general tab where we add HTML attributes, you can now go under to the bottom, you now see the attributes. If I click on the plus icon, I can now add my attributes, the name and the value. Notice that both the name and the value have access to the dynamic data tags. So you can add dynamic tags for both the name and the value. And you can add as many attributes as you want because it is a repeater field. So now let's go ahead and add the first attribute, which is ARIA-hidden. And we just set it to true. Let me go ahead and publish it. And we'll preview it on the front end. You can see if I go to my icon now, right click, and then inspect it, we have the ARIA hidden equal to true. Although the SVG element is kind of unique in Elementor, they had to add the div wrapper. So we still have a wrapper div, but only for SVG elements. And then the ARIA attribute is added to that div, unfortunately. But since we're adding ARIA hidden, it doesn't really matter. I would hope that we can add attributes directly to our SVGs in case we want to add some other attributes, but I think it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, just to let you know that some elements like the SVG and the YouTube elements, they have some wrapper divs, but the other elements is what you see is what you get. The other element that was added is the divider element. However, when I was checking the output of the code, it is using the HR tag, and I'm still a bit conflicted about it. So I would like to hear your thoughts. If you're an accessibility expert or you know about semantic HTML, is the HR tag the right tag to use for divider elements? Let me know in the comments. But now let's take a look. Okay, if I go over to the plus icon to add a new element, you would notice that under the atomic elements, we now have a new element called the divider element. Let me go ahead and add it to a new container. So we get our divider element, and we can go ahead and style it however we want. So if I go to the size tab, I can set the width to something like maybe 100% and maybe max width to something like 700 pixels. I can change the height to maybe 4 pixels. See, it gets thicker. And if I go over to the front end, so I'll publish and preview on the front end, you can see the divider line. It has the 700 pixels and the height as well. If I go ahead and inspect it, you see it's using the HR tag. It's a single element like other atomic elements. It doesn't have any wrapper div. So just directly on the element, we have the width, the height I set, and the max width. But like I said, it's using the HR tag, and based on the description from the MDN docs, I like using the MDN docs. I'll leave a link to it in the description. It says that the HR HTML element represents a thematic break between paragraph level elements. For example, a change of scene in a story or a shift of topic within a section. And it gives you some examples. So what I would say is, if you're just going to use the divider element for styling purposes, then I'll suggest that you use border instead of having another element just to add that divider, because the HR tag is a semantic HTML that is used for a purpose. If it's only for styling, then we always suggest use CSS for styling, use HTML for actual content. So just think about it, do your own research before you use the divider element, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the HR tag is meant for? So yeah, let's move on. The final one we'll talk about today is actually a funny one, and it says that they added support for LH and RLH CSS units in typography line height control. So that's basically for the version 3 elements. And let me show you an example. If I come over to a version 3 element like the heading, if I go over to the style tab and I go over to the typography settings, click on the pencil icon, you now see that for the line height only, if you click on the pixel, we now have LH and RLH. So that's a line height and root line height. But basically, those units are not actually used for line height. They're used for other things to kind of relate to the line height of the element. Let me show you what I mean. If you go to the MDN docs, it says the LH unit is equal to the computed value of the line height property of the element on which it is used. So it is computing it from the line height of the element, and you're now using that same line height to determine the line height. So it's like a convoluted thing. Actually, it should be used in other elements to relate to the line height. So let me check for LH and RLH. And you see an example from CSS Tricks. And basically, you can see what they did here. They used the line height to determine the width and height of the icon so that the icon can be perfectly aligned to the text. So they're not using the line height to determine the line height. So that LH and RLH is better used on the width and height, not on the line height. It's not like viewport width, where it is checking the width of the viewport in comparison to the element. This one, you are testing the element with the element itself. So you have to make some changes. So let me know your thoughts. Where are these units better placed? Should it be in the line height or in other properties? I know we already have the pencil icon, so you can choose your different units in any element already, but it's just funny that they added LH and RLH in the line height unit properties. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, do leave a thumbs up. That will really help me. Write in the comments. Just let's have some engagement. Let me know your thoughts about the whole Elementor 3.31 beta. Are you happy with the new features that are coming out? Are there any new features you would want to see added? Or are there any changes you want to see updated? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.